My mother told me my father died before I was born. I believed her for 18 years.
Then on my birthday, a package arrived at my door with 3 words written inside. Love, Dad. When I was little, I used to ask my mother the same question every birthday. Did my dad ever get to hold me? Every year, her answer was exactly the same. She'd look away. Her face would go pale. And then she'd whisper, "No, sweetheart, your father died before you were born." That answer shaped my entire childhood. Other kids made Father's Day cards in school. I sat quietly and pretended not to care. At parent-teacher conferences, I watched dads stand proudly beside their daughters while my mother squeezed my hand a little tighter than usual. Whenever someone asked where my father was, I'd repeat the line she taught me. He died before I was born. People always looked at me with pity, and I learned to hate that look. Because how do you miss someone you never knew? How do you grieve a ghost? But even as a child, something about my mother's story never felt right, because she never talked about him. Not lovingly.
Not sadly.
Not at all. There were no photos, no stories, no keepsakes, no grave to visit, no relatives from his side. Nothing. It was as if my father had existed for 1 second, long enough to make me, and then vanished from history. When I was 10, I found a locked wooden box in the back of my mother's closet. Inside were old documents, jewelry, and one photograph. A young man stood smiling into the camera.
Tall.
Dark hair. Kind eyes. His arm wrapped around my pregnant mother. I'd never seen him before. On the back, written in fading ink, were the words, "Waiting for our little girl, Daniel." My father had a name, Daniel. My heart nearly exploded with excitement. I ran downstairs with the picture in my hand.
Mom.
Is this Dad? The moment she saw the photo, her face transformed. Not sadness. Panic. She snatched it from my hand so hard the corner bent. "Where did you find this?" "In your closet." "I told you never to go through my things." She burned the photograph in the kitchen sink. Burned it, while I stood there crying and screaming for her to stop. That night, she sat on my bed and stroked my hair. "You have to trust me," she whispered. "Some things are better left buried." I should have known then. Dead men don't need to stay buried. Only secrets do. But I was a child, and children believe their mothers.
So I stopped asking.
Mostly. Still, little things kept happening through the years. Things I couldn't explain. When I was 12 and wanted a red bicycle for my birthday but knew we couldn't afford one, it appeared on our porch the next morning. No note. My mother claimed it was from a church charity. When I made varsity debate at 15, an anonymous bouquet arrived at school with a card that read, "Knew you'd make it. Proud of you." Mom said it must be from a teacher. When my laptop broke senior year, a brand new one was delivered to our house. No sender. My mother looked terrified when she saw it. She made me return it. At the time, I thought maybe life was just strange. Now I know better. Someone was watching me. Someone who knew me. Someone who cared. And on my 18th birthday, that someone stepped out of the shadows. It came in a plain brown package. No return address. My mother was at work. I almost left it unopened. Almost. Inside was a velvet box. A silver necklace. Simple. Elegant. Attached was a folded letter. My hand shook as I opened it, and the first line made the room spin around me. "Happy 18th birthday, Emma. I've watched over you every year of your life. Love, Dad." I stopped breathing. I read it again.
And again.
And again. There were 6 pages. 6 pages written by a man I'd been told was dead. He wrote about the day I was born. How beautiful I looked.
How hard it was not to hold me.
How he had watched every school recital from the back row. Every soccer game from the fence. Every graduation ceremony from a distance. He wrote, "I promised myself that if your mother ever told you the truth, I would stay away. But if she kept lying, I would find a way to reach you when you turned 18. If you are reading this, then she never told you." My legs gave out. I sank to the floor. My father was alive. He had always been alive. And my mother had lied to me for 18 years. At the bottom of the letter was an address. And one final sentence. If you want answers, come find me. I stared at that line for an hour. Then I waited. Waited until my mother came home. The second she stepped inside, I held up the letter and watched all the blood drain from her face. She whispered one word. No, you lied to me. Tears filled her eyes instantly. Emma, please. You lied to me my entire life. She tried to take the letter. I pulled it back. He's alive.
Her shoulders collapsed.
She sat down like her legs had stopped working. And for a long time, she said nothing. Then finally, he was never supposed to contact you. That sentence chilled me more than the lie itself. Why would you tell me he was dead? Her eyes hardened. Because that man is dangerous. My stomach dropped. Dangerous? He abandoned us. He says he watched me my whole life. He's a liar. She stood abruptly. He manipulates people. He ruins lives. I protected you.
Protected me.
That word echoed in my head. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe he was dangerous. But then why the gifts? Why the school events? Why wait 18 years? None of it fit. And when people lie once, you stop knowing where the lie ends. That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, I skipped school, took the bus, and went to the address on the letter. It led to a small house outside town. White porch, blue shutters, wind chimes swaying softly. A man opened the door before I knocked, and the moment I saw him, my entire world shifted, because I was staring into my own face. Same eyes, same nose, same jawline. He looked at me like he'd dreamed of this moment for years. Then whispered, Emma, and started crying. I should have hated him, should have screamed, should have demanded answers. Instead, I cried too, because for the first time in my life, I was looking at someone who looked like me. He invited me inside. Every wall of his living room was covered in photographs.
Me.
School pictures, dance recitals, graduation photos, candids from parks, soccer games, birthdays, years of my life, documented, preserved,
Loved.
You really watched me. Every word hurt to say. He nodded through tears. Every chance I got. Why? His face broke. Because she took you from me. And then he told me everything. He and my mother met in college. Fell in love. Planned to marry. Then she got pregnant. At first, they were happy. But her wealthy parents hated him. He came from nothing. Worked construction. No degree. No money. No family connections. They told her he would ruin her future. She chose him anyway. Until her father offered her something. A way out. Money. Security. A future. On one condition. She left him. And erased him. When she was 7 months pregnant, she disappeared. Moved across state lines with her parents. Blocked him. Changed numbers. Changed addresses. He hired lawyers. Fought for visitation. Fought for custody. Spent every dollar he had. And then, my mother claimed he was unstable. Violent. Obsessive. She fabricated incidents. Produced false witness statements. Her father's money buried him in court. The judge issued restrictions. He lost.
Completely.
He wasn't allowed near me. Wasn't allowed contact. Wasn't allowed to tell me who he was. Unless I sought him out as an adult. My head spun. No. He slid a folder across the table. Court documents. Legal filings. Psych evaluations clearing him. Witness statements. Appeals. Years of evidence. Proof. My mother had destroyed him. To erase him from my life. Why keep watching me? He smiled sadly. Because loving you was the only thing I never stopped doing. I broke. I sobbed harder than I ever had in my life. Because the man I mourned never existed. And the man I should have known had spent 18 years loving me from a distance. We talked for hours. About everything. His favorite color. My favorite food. The fact we both hated mushrooms. Loved thunderstorms. Bit our nails when anxious. It felt unnatural how familiar he was. like meeting someone I had always known in another life. When I got home, my mother was waiting. She saw my face and knew. You went to him. Yes. Her eyes filled with fury. You have no idea what he is. I know what you did. I threw the court papers at her. She went white. You lied in court. Silence. You told everyone he was dangerous. Silence. You stole my father from me. And then, she said the one thing that shattered whatever sympathy I had left. I did what was necessary. Necessary. Necessary to erase a man. Necessary to let your daughter grieve someone alive. Necessary to steal 18 years.
I moved out that week.
Into my father's guest room. My mother called nonstop. Texted. Begged.
Cried.
Then raged. Then blamed him.
Then blamed me.
But I was done. Or, at least, I thought I was. Because 3 weeks later, my grandmother called and told me the truth my father didn't know. My mother hadn't just lied because of pressure. She had another reason. A darker one. When she was pregnant, she cheated on him with the wealthy man her parents wanted her to marry. And for months, she wasn't sure who my biological father was. She panicked, afraid scandal would destroy her, afraid Daniel would leave if he knew. So when I was born, she secretly ordered a paternity test. Daniel was the father, but by then, she'd already chosen the rich man. And, rather than confess, she erased Daniel. My hands shook hearing it. She hadn't lied to protect me. She lied to protect herself. Her pride. Her reputation. Her future. I confronted her one last time. She didn't deny it. She just cried. And said, I was young. I made mistakes. Mistakes? A mistake is cheating. A mistake is lying once. What she did was a calculated theft of 2 lives. I walked away. Months passed. Then something happened I never expected. My mother got sick. Very sick. Hospitalized. And suddenly everyone in the family expected me to forgive her. She's still your mother. She did what she thought was best. Don't punish her forever. But where was that compassion for my father, who lost 18 birthdays, 18 Christmases, 18 years? Still, I visited her, because hatred is heavy, and I was tired of carrying it. She looked smaller in that hospital bed, older, fragile. She cried the moment she saw me. I'm sorry. I said nothing. I thought if you knew him, you'd love him more than me. That confession stunned me. Not greed, not status, not fear. Jealousy. Pure jealousy. She was afraid I'd choose him, so she made sure I never had the chance. I looked at her for a long time, then said, You made that happen anyway. She broke down sobbing, and, for the first time, I believed she understood what she had done. Forgiveness didn't come that day, or the next. It took years. Slow, imperfect years. But eventually, I learned something. Forgiveness isn't pretending nothing happened. It isn't excusing pain. It's deciding someone's worst act will not control the rest of your life. My mother and I rebuilt something, not what we had before. That died with the lie. But something new.
Honest.
Fragile.
Real.
And my father? He walked me down the aisle 5 years later. Cried harder than anyone there. Even before the ceremony started. During his speech, he held up that first birthday letter. And said, I lost 18 years with my daughter, but I'll spend the rest of my life grateful she gave me one day. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Sometimes I still think about the little girl who believed her father was dead, who sat alone during Father's Day crafts, who envied every child with a dad. And I wish I could go back and tell her, he didn't leave you.
He didn't die.
He loved you every single day. He was there, watching, waiting,
Hoping.
for the day you'd finally know the truth. And all because of one birthday gift. I got my father back. I thought learning my father was alive would be the biggest shock of my life. I was wrong, because 3 days after moving into his house, someone knocked on the door at 11:47 p.m. My father looked through the peephole, and all the color drained from his face. He whispered, No, not him. Before I could ask what he meant, He grabbed my arm. Go upstairs. Lock the door. Don't come out. My heart pounded. Dad, who is?
Now.
I ran upstairs, hands shaking, and from behind the bedroom door, I heard shouting. A man's voice. Older.
Cold.
Then something smashed. Then silence. By the time I came downstairs, the front door was wide open. My father stood frozen, face pale, a single envelope in his hand. What happened? He stared at it like it was poison, then finally said, "That was your grandfather." My stomach dropped. My mother's father, the man who helped erase him. What did he want? Dad handed me the envelope. Inside was one typed sentence. Stay away from her, or this time you lose everything. I looked up. What does that mean this time? My father sat down slowly and told me the part of the story he'd never written in the letter. The part even the court records didn't show. The reason my grandfather hated him wasn't just because he was poor.
It was because my father knew something.
Something that could destroy their family forever. Years ago, before I was born, my father worked construction for my grandfather's development company. And while managing one of his sites, he discovered massive fraud, unsafe materials, fake inspections, bribed officials, projects approved that should have been condemned, buildings people lived in that weren't safe. When my father threatened to report it, my grandfather offered him money. He refused. Days later, my mother vanished, and the custody war began. It had never just been about keeping him from me. It was retaliation, punishment. They ruined him because he threatened the family empire. And now, after 18 years,
They were scared again.
because I knew the truth. At first, I wanted nothing to do with it. I had just gotten my father back. I didn't want some corporate scandal. Didn't want legal battles. Didn't want more family destruction. Then, 2 weeks later, a local apartment building collapsed. 3 people died. And the developer's name on the news? My grandfather's company. That was the moment everything changed. Because suddenly, this wasn't old history. People were still getting hurt. My father opened a locked safe in his basement. Inside were copies of everything. Contracts, inspection reports, photos, emails, proof he'd kept hidden for nearly 2 decades. In case I ever got the chance to expose him, he said. And, for the first time, I understood why my mother's family fear him. We took the evidence to a journalist, then waited. 5 days later, the story exploded. Headlines everywhere. Corruption,
Fraud.
bribery, deaths linked to negligence. My grandfather was arrested within a week.
His company collapsed.
My mother's family name was destroyed overnight. And then, my mother came to see me.
Not angry.
Not defensive. Broken.
She stood on the porch crying.
I never knew it was that bad. I stared at her. You helped them destroy him. She shook her head violently. I thought it was just about money status. I didn't know what my father had done. For the first time, she looked genuinely horrified. And maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe she had lied, manipulated, destroyed lives, without ever understanding the full machine she helped operate. Then she said something I never expected. I'll testify. That changed everything. Because her testimony confirmed the conspiracy, the bribed custody fight, the false abuse claims, the threats, all of it. My grandfather went to prison. Several officials went with him. And my father, after 18 years, was publicly cleared. The local paper ran the headline. Father falsely smeared in custody, scandal exonerated after 18 years. He framed that article.
Hung it in the hallway.
But the best part? It wasn't revenge. It wasn't justice. It wasn't even watching the people who ruined him fall. It was what came after.
Peace.
Real peace. For the first time in his life, my father stopped looking over his shoulder. And for the first time in mine, I had both parents telling me the truth. Years later, at my wedding, my mother and father stood in the same room. Not friends, not even close, but civil. Because enough damage had been done. When my father walked me down the aisle, he leaned over and whispered, "They stole 18 years from us. then smiled through tears. But they didn't get today. And, in that moment, I realized something. The truth may arrive late. It may come after damage, after lies, after years stolen. But when it finally arrives, it changes everything. All because of one birthday gift from the father I was told was dead. I thought the story was over after my grandfather went to prison. I was wrong, because 2 months later, my father collapsed in the kitchen. At first, I thought he'd slipped. Then I saw the blood. He was coughing into his hand, and his palm was red. Everything after that became hospital lights and panic.
Tests. Scans.
Doctors whispering in hallways. Then the diagnosis. Stage 4 lung cancer. My world shattered all over again. No, I kept saying. No, 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 this isn't happening. I had just found him. I had just gotten my father back. How could I lose him now? He sat beside me in the hospital room, calmer than I was, and said the words I'll never forget. I think that's why I sent the letter when I did. My stomach dropped. You knew? He nodded slowly. I found out 6 months before your birthday. My chest tightened. You were sick this whole time? He looked down. I couldn't risk waiting any longer. That broke me, because while I thought he had finally chosen to contact me, the truth was worse. He contacted me because he was running out of time. I needed you to know the truth before it was too late. I cried harder than I had in years. And then he reached into his bag and handed me a thick sealed envelope. What's this? He smiled weakly. Everything I wrote to you over 18 years. Inside were dozens of letters. Birthday letters. One for every single year of my life. Letters he wrote but was never allowed to send. Age 1. Age 2. Age 5. Age 10. Age 16. Each one filled with things like, today I watched you take your first steps from across the park. You lost your front tooth and wouldn't stop smiling. You cried after your first soccer loss. I wanted to hug you so badly. You got your driver's license today. I followed behind just to make sure you got home safe. He had documented my life, like a father trapped outside his own window. I spent that night reading every letter,
Sobbing.
laughing, breaking apart. Then came his final request. Will you do something for me? Anything. He handed me a small key to the attic. Confused, I went upstairs, unlocked the attic door, and froze. The entire room had been turned into a museum of my life. Boxes,
Shelves.
walls, every drawing I ever made in school, every newspaper clipping, every photo, every online award, every accomplishment, even the stupid poem I wrote in 8th grade and forgot existed. My knees buckled. On the center table sat a final note. For every moment I missed, I found a way to keep. I couldn't breathe. No one had ever loved me like that. No one, not even close. My father died 3 months later, holding my hand. His last words to me were, I waited 18 years to hear you call me Dad. Thank you for giving me that. He was gone before I could answer. For weeks, I couldn't function.
Couldn't sleep.
Couldn't enter his house without crying. Then the lawyer called. There was a will. I assumed it was the house. Savings. Something practical. It wasn't. My father left me a box. Inside was a videotape labeled, Play After I'm Gone. Hands trembling. I watched it. He sat in the same living room.
Thinner.
Paler. Looking directly into the camera. If you're watching this, then I didn't get enough time. I burst into tears immediately. He smiled sadly. But I need you to know one thing before you live the rest of your life angry. He took a breath. Forgive your mother. I stared at the screen in shock. She stole years from us. But if you carry that hatred forever, then she steals even more. Tears streamed down my face. Love the people who love you while they're here. Don't wait until grief teaches you how precious time is. Then he smiled softly. And if you ever have a daughter, he held up the silver necklace for my 18th birthday.
Tell her about me.
The video ended, and I sat there for hours, because somehow, even in death, he was still teaching me how to live. A year later, I visited my mother. Not because the pain was gone. Not because what she did was okay. But because he asked me to. She opened the door, saw my face, and burst into tears before I said a word. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know." And for the first time in my life, I hugged her because I chose to, not because I had to. Years later, when my daughter was born, I gave her my father's middle name, and on her first birthday, I placed that silver necklace in a memory box for her, alongside one photograph, the only surviving picture of my father holding me as a baby. On the back, I wrote, "He never stopped loving us." Sometimes people ask how I found out my dead father was alive. I tell them the truth. He sent me a birthday gift. But that isn't the real story. The real story is this. My father lost 18 years and still spent every remaining day loving me enough for a lifetime.